Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I guess I should say. Welcome to our webinar. So you want to be a CISO, your full life cycle guide. And when we say full life cycle, we mean full life cycle, from wanting to be one, to training to being one, to not being one anymore. So it's totally fully life cycle. My name is Jerry Murphy. I'm the Senior Vice President of Research and Consulting at Nemertes. And joining me is the able-bodied Johna Johnson, our CEO and founder. I will encourage you during this webinar to submitting any questions that you have along the way. And also, I would tell you to check out the attachments. If you look at a little paper clip, it will show you ways that you can connect with me and Johna, go to research communities and all that stuff. So there's other resources that are available if you look at the attachment link that is available throughout our broadcast. So what we're going to go through is we're going to describe the issue resulting in being a CISO. What is the primary job? What is the real job of the CISO as opposed to what people think it is by the job description? What it is you can do to prepare to become a CISO, the certifications that you need to consider, expertise that you will want to acquire, what the business of being a CISO is, then what are some of the things that we think are good for you to do in those first few months of being a CISO through the next 10, 100, however many years you think you're going to last as a CISO. And then we're going to kind of finally wrap it up with what are some of the things that you might consider at the end of your career. So taking this at a pretty broad brush. Now what we're going to do, and I'll have Johna talk a little bit about what is the issue here that we're talking about with being a CISO.
So the real question people ask is, what is the primary job of being a CISO? So because this is the AI age, I went ahead and asked ChatGPT, and it basically said, a CISO is a senior level executive responsible for overseeing an organization's information security strategy and implementation. Some of the key responsibilities may include, and then they're itemized here. It's not bad as these things go, typical ChatGPT. I think more succinct way of putting it is to say the CISO's job is to protect the organization against assaults that come in through any form of information security. So above all, those first words are protect an organization. Down below, it says that protect an organization's sensitive data and information assets, but quite accurately, it's protecting the entire organization, including things like its brand and reputation from the impacts of an assault or an attack. So that's the official primary job. Yeah, Jerry?
Yeah. So John just spouted what might be considered the pedagogical definition of being a CISO. Of course, what do we really want to know? What is the real job of a CISO? The real job, of course, if you're the company and you're not the CISO, the answer is you're the person who's the stuckee. That is, if there's some major breach, you're the person that we can point to say, oh, this breach, it's all Johna's fault. It's all Jerry's fault. It's all our CISO's fault, so that they can show I'm taking an action to address whatever security thing is there. And I mean, we think we're saying this a little tongue in cheek, but it is actually real. We have seen countless times that the CISO has been fired, and in some cases, actually going to jail. This is a real situation where was it
Joe Sullivan?
Yeah, Joe Sullivan at
Uber.
Yeah, Uber, right? Where it was like he literally got told to do things that were illegal. From his perspective, I'm doing what I'm told, and he was found criminally liable. So
and his defense and his explanation was, they gave me, the other senior execs gave me orders, I fulfilled my orders, and I'm the fall guy. Well, guess what? Probably he was. It may be that he was guilty of committing crimes, and I followed orders is, as we know, post Nuremberg, no defense. But nonetheless, it's quite plausible that he was set up to be the fall guy, and that's the whole point. Your job as a CISO is fall guy.
But I'll tell you what, keep this in mind, because we're going to be talking a little bit later where thinking about this seriously in the back of your mind will be important in planning and tracking your own career if you choose to be a CISO. But while we're kind of kidding around here, it's serious. If this is going to be a part of your job, potentially you need to think about that before you get into this job, and when you think about talking with your employer, how you're going to accept this potential responsibility / liability. Absolutely. Now, what are some of the things you can do to prepare for being a CISO? Clearly, you need to have a strong foundation in cybersecurity. You can think on the one hand, well, the only way I'm going to be a CISO is to be a previous CISO. And that may be true in the sense that before you can be a CISO of a Fortune 100 company, they may pick somebody that's been a CISO of a smaller company that has the experience. But certainly at some level, somebody who's a CISO wasn't one before. Certainly you need to have folks in cybersecurity, but it's equally important to have expertise in your field. So the way you want to think about handling security may be different in a financial institution versus a media institution versus somebody that's doing hospitality versus an educational field. It's important for you to understand what the issues are that are specific to your field, because they're going to have a very different impact on the kinds of risks that are acceptable, the kind of risks that are unacceptable, and those are very industry specific. Certainly having leadership skills is very important because you're ultimately going to be in charge of a group of people, vendors perhaps, as well as service providers, and having leadership is very important for that.
Before you jump into the industry trends, I just want to point out, we were talking this morning that the Germans used to talk about, axes on which you can measure personalities. They can be clever, stupid, hardworking, lazy. And apparently the configuration that's best for leadership is clever and lazy. Yay! Team clever and lazy.
us CEOs or former CEOs are like, yeah, we like that.
Yes.
And in one sense, we're saying that a little sillily, but really, one of the problems with some leaders is you feel the compelling need to do everything. And the reality is, as you grow and as things get complex, and if one place things are getting complex is in the area of security, new threats are occurring, new days, new vectors, new applications, new ways of attacking us. So you have to stay on top of these, and you can't possibly be a subject matter expert at all of the different areas that are required. Better for you is to have the expertise in one area and then understanding how to assess the people in the different areas that are going to be responsible for their particular domains. Along those lines, networking with other professionals is very, very important, both in CISOs generally to see trends, because you may see something in one domain. For example, financial services very often are going to see threats maybe before a manufacturing company or an educational institution. So the fact that you can share things across domains can bring some information you might not otherwise know. Also, given what we said a couple slides ago, that your job may be to get fired if things go south, having a community of people that you're networking and have relationships with is very important. One thing I will say, we don't cover it in this slide in here so much, but the good news in some sense is the security industry is very understaffed right now. So the good news is, while you become a CISO and you might be subject to getting fired, it's not like there's no place else to go in the security industry. Security industry today is very, very understaffed. And so there will be places for you to go, but having those contacts is very important to do that. Consider additional training too, not just within security, but having skills in networking, having skills in application and other elements of infrastructure can go a long way to increasing your value as a CISO, because they'll better let you know how to relate to other groups that you need to work for. And finally, look for more responsibility. One of the key things that people want in leaders in any area, and security especially, is the willingness to accept responsibility for actions. And in this area of risk management, being able to say, hey, I'm going to be the one who takes ownership is going to go a long way to put you in that seat. Now, what are some of the certifications that you want to consider? These are, I'm not going to read every single one of you. These are some of the leading ones. My own experience is CISSP, Certified Information Systems Security Professional. That's probably the one that I've seen at a bunch of different industries, that regardless of the industry segment, that is very well known and very well accepted. These other ones I'm not denigrating any one of them. Any of these is better than having none. Having a couple of them is really great. But the more that you can, and one of the things that's important on these certifications is the fact that you can actually go through specific concrete education and testing that lets people know that you have a certain level of thoroughness. But different certifications are going to be relevant for different specific industries. Now, what is the other expertise you want to acquire? There is technical expertise and industry expertise. So certainly on the technical side, anything around networking and security, NetSecOps. This is one thing that we're seeing is we're starting to see a merger between it used to be a SOC, a security operations center, and you had networking operations that really seem to be completely separate. The reality is, especially as you're going towards things like zero trust architectures, these lines are increasingly blurring because the data that you need from these different domains are really critical to being able to tie everything together. So I think you're going to see more and more of this merging of networking, application security, cloud security is certainly important. More and more companies are looking at, it's not just my data center, but now I may outsource something to somebody like, Amazon or Microsoft Azure, Google, and increasingly not only just cloud security elements, but then there are also application providers, and each one of those has their own types of security that's needed. Knowing things about threat intelligence, general incident response, risk management, and finally, compliance. The compliance is very industry specific. You see HIPAA, very much something that's in the healthcare industry. You have things like Sarbanes-Oxley, which very much apply to the financial services industry. They're important. And one of the things I like to say, though, is compliance is a minimum thing. You certainly have to comply with laws, but just because you're complying with laws does not mean that you're secure. And on the industry experience side, as I mentioned earlier, the more that you can understand your specific industry, not just the security elements in your industry, but what are the processes and what are the business processes and IT processes that are related to your industry. In some cases, you may have very geographic specific issues because the rules that you need to follow in security, things that are in Europe are very different than they are in Asia, are very different than they are in the United States. So having knowledge of specific geographies can be something
and I want to circle back to the risks because there's two things to keep in mind in industry expertise. One is the industry risk appetite. So some industries are highly risk averse, like utilities, for example. Gosh, I wonder why. Or healthcare. Other organizations are much more risk tolerant, such as high tech. Doesn't really matter. There's no right answer, but the industries overall have an appetite for risk. And then, of course, your organization within that industry. Are you a conservative organization in an industry that's highly risk tolerant, for example? Could be. So these are just things to know and be aware of and have kind of in your DNA.
Yeah, and all of that stuff is going to be not just geographic specific, but it's going to be also industry specific. So if you look at financial services, you would think on one hand, they may be cutting edge in terms of their analysis of identifying markets. If you think about market trading and investing, those guys are analyzing massive data, trying to make microsecond decisions on things they're going to do. Having said that, a lot of these guys are very risk averse towards putting things in the cloud. They're doing a lot of cutting edge things with applications and with computing, but they're not necessarily giving it to cloud providers because of the risk associated with financial information and things like PII. Now, talked a little bit about what are some of the things that you need for training. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the business side. Now, when you look at the typical reporting structure, typically, you could report directly to the CIO or board of directors. The thing that's great about that kind of structure is it gives you as a CISO the direct line to the highest decision-making in the organization, and it also shows the strategic importance of security. That's not necessarily where they are. Very often we'll see them either report to the CIO or the chief operations officer, or even legally in the general counsel, sometimes with the chief risk officer. each one of those has a different benefit and risk associated with those reporting structures. I would tell you, from my perspective, you're actually seeing more and more people looking towards having the CISO reporting to the CEO board of directors, because people are realizing just how critical the security is to any industry, not just IT-based industries.
So the question is, when you're negotiating your contract, what should you be looking for? There is no single reporting structure that's optimal, but I will tell you that our research shows that reporting directly to someone whose prime function is business, and by which I mean a CEO, a board, even someone chief legal officer, is correlated with better security operational metrics than reporting to, say, a CIO. And for that reason, so I will say, first of all, our research shows that you're going to do better if you're reporting to somebody whose job is by some big definition of business, because that means your job is translating cybersecurity risk into business risk, and you're going to be talking the tech language to the people that report to you, and you're going to be talking business to the people above you, and that's really where the CISO can shine. That said, in a lot of cases, the CISO is reporting to the CIO. It turns out that's actually not an optimal reporting structure, and I'll get to that in a second. What good ones are, as Jerry said, CEO, COO, maybe legal team, directly to the board. That gives the high level of profile, the high profile to cybersecurity that you want, as well as the fact that since your job is to do that tech to business translation, that's the perfect role for you. Jerry points out that reporting to a chief risk officer is fundamentally a conflict of interest. And Jerry, your point is it's the assessor versus the enforcer of risk, right?
Exactly. And the thing is, that's where the conflict is, because the job of the chief risk officer is to assess the risk of your company. And the job of the CISO is to enforce that risk, right? And so to me, if the person responsible for assessing it,
it's the fox in the hen house, basically.
Right, that's exactly it, right? So I might get pressured by my chief risk officer to do things that don't make sense for me, and then ultimately make it tough for me to do my job if in doing my job it's counter to what the chief risk officer wants. So I can, on one hand, it may seem, it'd be perfectly sense, because to me, security is a sub element of risk to the business, because clearly security isn't the only risk businesses have, right? It's, do they have enough money to do their job?
But it's that assessor versus enforcer that really kicks it in. Exactly. And, my perspective is that reporting to the CIO is fundamentally a conflict of interest, because the CIO's job in a nutshell is to buy new technology and make it work and make it deliver business value. And the CISO's job is to keep that technology from introducing risk. So as the CIO is busily setting it up, the CISO is busily tamping it down. And that sets up in place a real strain unless the CIO is an extremely unusual person. And so in a lot of cases, that's really non-optimal. The bottom line, though, is you need to think about all these things, decide who you want to be reporting to, and make sure that you negotiate that reporting structure when you're talking to your potential hiring, your potential new job.
Yeah, and to me, one of the things that's important to think about is the job of the CISO is you need to be able to accurately tell management, whether that is the CRO, CEO, or HR legal, what is the risk of doing a certain course of action, right? Hey, if you don't have firewalls, here's what things could happen without those things. If you did this, then here's what might happen. In order to mitigate that risk, here's how much it will cost to mitigate that risk. It's up to the business to finally decide to give you the money to mitigate that risk or to accept the risk. So, God help you if you didn't properly assess the risk and tell them what the true costs were. But if you told them what the risks are, at the end of the day, it's up to the business to determine what risks you as a CISO have to accept in doing your job.
Okay. And I think the next couple are me, Jerry. Just checking my notes. Yes. So I'll try to keep this a little crisp because I know we're running a bit long. Who you should consider having as direct reports. And again, putting this in the context of you've been offered a position, some of the questions to ask are, who would my direct reports be? And if the answer is we don't have any of these people, the question is, are they funded? So you would want your InfoSec cybersecurity team. You would also want people who focus on AppSec and DevSecOps. That is actually currently an underfunded and underemphasized area in most organizations. So one key question is my responsibility, does it include AppSec? It should, because that's what most CISOs cover. And if so, do you have funded people in that area? The incident response team includes the InfoSec/cybersecurity team, but also includes a bunch of other folks. So the question is, where do you stop and the dotted line start? And do you have headcount for technology-specific cybersecurity, such as collaboration, or what, as it's now called, digital employee experience, or things like blockchain digital ledgers if you're deploying those, or desktop or mobile devices, AI ops cybersecurity, quantum computing cybersecurity. These are the non-traditional areas where people may be forging ahead without really thinking about the security impacts. So if you don't have either a person funding for a person or plans for funding a person, you may want to raise that when you're negotiating.
And I would just stress real quickly that AI's clearly become really, really big now. My prediction is, when you're going to see, if you look at the classic Gartner hype cycle, we're in this really big hype, then you're going to have that trough of disillusionment. And I would be willing to bet that the trough of disillusionment will happen because there's some security incident evolved around somebody aggressively using AI before they've really understood all the implications of it.
Absolutely, which is why we recommend you have somebody there. Jerry, can you click to the next slide, because we'll talk about adjacencies. So you're asking, okay, so when you're having this conversation, who am I going to report to, and to what degree is that negotiable? Who's going to report to me? Who do I have funding to hire if the team doesn't have the right people? Then who are the people, who are my peers, and what would my relationships, what do you, Mr. Employer or Ms. Employer, envision my relationships with these key adjacencies being? One would be the business continuance team. This is the team that is responsible for making sure that the organization as a whole can continue its operations. If the answer is we don't have anybody in business continuance, guess what? That's going to be you. And that may make your job a lot more work than it would be otherwise. If they do have someone, you probably want to meet that person and see if there's a good chemistry there. Compliance, Jerry already touched on that. Obviously, you want to know who's there and, again, have a cordial relationship. Same thing with risk management. You may be in some sense adversaries, but you're adversaries on the same team, so you want to know who you're working with. And again, you probably want to meet your counterparts on finance, i.e. the CFO, legal, chief legal officer, operations, HR, IT, physical security, and environmental health and safety, because all of those folks are people you're going to be having conversations with. You don't control them, they don't control you, but the more you can collaborate effectively with them, the more effective you're going to be at doing your job. So again, boiling this all down to the context of you're negotiating your first CISO job, what questions do you ask about the people? This is one set of them. So ask who's reporting to you, ask who you're reporting to, and meet the people that are going to be in the adjacencies.
Right.
Oh, and that's right. I get to talk about the budget. Yes, last but not least, you have people and budget. In previous research we've done, we've looked at the different ways that folks say they set the budget. There's the ad hoc approach where CISOs have told us, I don't have a budget. I just go to the board and they give me money I need when I need it. It sounds good. It turns out it's not very effective. Then there's the more common metrics or benchmark based, which is, Gartner says we should spend 4% of our IT budget on cybersecurity. So that's what we do. I'll talk about why that's not a good idea in a second. The last way is risk-based, which is the way to set the budget. It turns out that we've actually done the research and we found that risk-based correlates with better operational security metrics by far. Metrics and benchmark-based is easy but wrong. The reason is the mindset behind metrics or benchmark is, look, I spent $100 on a new car, so I'm going to spend $1 on its warranty. Well, the logical flaw in that is you're not protecting the car. You're protecting the entire organization of which the car is a piece. So if you say, I spent $100,000 on IT, so therefore I should spend $10,000 on cybersecurity, That's false, because the question is, how big is your organization and what risk are you protecting the organization from? And that's why you want to use a risk-based measurement to set your cybersecurity budget. Things like, what is the reputational damage if we get breached? If the answer is not very much, because it doesn't really matter, we make nuts and bolts, and as long as the nuts and bolts, look exactly the same after the breach as they did before, nobody cares. That's one thing. If you're one of the businesses that depends highly on trust, like financial services, then reputational damage may be worth millions to billions of dollars. So you should really be assessing your cybersecurity budget. That should be dependent on the risk that you're being asked to contain. You can also look at, if you absolutely have to have some way to factor in, to benchmark things, you can look at the spend per head count. That's going to vary widely across industry. We have data across a broad range of industries. At the low end, you're going to see $100 a head count. That's usually something like retail, where there's very little, retail, especially franchise, fast, quick serve restaurants, things like that. At the high end for financial services firms, you're going to see 3,000, 5,000 and more per head count. It really depends on the kind of business you're doing and the degree to which it is dependent on easily hacked technology. So basically, these are some ways to look at the budget. You want to ask, boiling this back down to questions when you're negotiating your first job, ask how the budget is set, what the budget is, mentally calculate that, compute that into the spend per head count. If you want to know whether that's a good spend or not, we gave you broad parameters. We can certainly give you much more granular parameters by industry if you contact us. And then think about how the budget, the way the budget's set, as I said, whether or not it's dependent on risk. And that's one of the most important things. So I think that's it for budgeting. So, now your budget.
Yeah. So given all of that, how do I then go about negotiating my compensation myself and the terms of my own employment contract, given the fact that you may very well be the sacrificial lamb of your company when it comes to risk? Now, what we normally see is, again, depends on the size of your company, typically $150,000 to $200,000. Now, you've seen some polls where you can make as much as $1 million plus. I personally have a friend that I know that's at a large tech company, and he makes over $1 million.
Yeah,
but again,
standard,
but that's going to be the very largest companies that have very large amounts of risks that you're doing. But one of the points is, based on the risk, is you should balance your considerations for your salary based on what your risk is going to be for the compensation. And if your company is one that you think is going to be likely to throw you under the bus, you want to make sure that your salary is commensurate with the risk that they're asking you to accept.
At a practical level, guys and gals, who is going to support your family if you're doing a six-year stint in jail? You have to have enough money coming in to support you and your family if you're in jail. And I hate to put it that way, but that's the way to think about it. So if somebody's putting you in one of those positions where there is some risk of you going to jail because things went screwy, you need to be sure that your people get paid. Your family is taken care of.
Absolutely, great point. Now, salary isn't the only thing. There certainly are other kinds of stock compensation. You can have things like stock options, stock grants. In practice, people are going to give you options, not grants, and you probably want those just because there's a tax implication of, if you get a grant, the government is going to tax you as if it's
immediately,
money you actually have. So that's something that you don't. And then if the company plummets and the stock value drops, then you're left with this massive liability without any assets. So options are generally better and more usually what are given. Retirement benefits are things that you can get. Usually as you get to executive levels, they have things that they call SERP, Special Executive Retirement Plans. If you're not an executive, you may have never heard about those because they're closely guarded secrets. But yeah, top executives actually can get pensions, and also things like healthcare. Again, you may want to insist on having healthcare for 1 or 2 or more years after you're retired or fired as part of your contract as well.
And let me remind you that Jerry is a former CEO and I'm a current CEO. So yes, he's giving away the secrets.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
But, anyhow, and then certainly do not agree to break the law. I mean, you can balance doing what somebody wants because you're a corporate asset of the company, but we would strongly recommend that you certainly don't agree in writing that you're going to be willing to break law.
Yeah, and what happened with Joe Sullivan is actually kind of interesting because what they did was they were breached. They fixed the breach and they determined that since nobody was really hurt by it, even though the hackers had access to a lot of customer data, they didn't inform anybody. And what was interesting was the law in California at the time said you had to inform everybody whether or not there was any damage. Later, it evolved to no, you don't. You only have to inform them if there is damage. And so essentially, Sullivan ended up going to jail for doing something that became legal afterwards, but was illegal at the time that he did it. And arguably, he was thinking it probably wasn't that big a deal, and he might have even known that it was on its way to not being illegal. But in any event, don't even skate close to the line on this one. So make sure you know the law. If you have to, hire your own private lawyer to figure out any possible liability.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's what, to me, like something's like marijuana. I just don't even touch it. I mean, maybe it's because I went to West Point and I was in the Army, but there's like, when in doubt, don't do it.
Right.
We're coming closely to an end here. So when you're negotiating your parachute, look at what the industry norms are and think about things like this. Understand your company's financial position, their key risks, and those risks are going to vary by industry. Develop a proposal, because I will tell you what, if you don't ask for it, you may not get it. If you do ask for it, the worst they can do is say no. So do not be afraid to ask for things. It's amazing how many things people are willing to give you. And again, it doesn't just have to be money. It could be time off, extended vacation, healthcare, medical benefits. There's plenty of things there. Also, get legal advice on these things. But one of the bottom lines I want to say in negotiating contracts is if you don't ask, you may not get it. So there's no harm in asking for these things. Now, when you start the job, first 100 days, these are some things that you really want to do. Make sure you meet with all those stakeholders that Johna talked about before. Do your own assessment. Don't take for granted what somebody says. Here's what the security posture is. Assess it for yourself. Once you've assessed it, come up with a strategic plan on how you're going to make improvements of things. Look at what your existing policies and procedures are. Assess your team, not just the technical aspect, but assess the skills of your team. Figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are. Is there going to be some organizational alignment you need to do to optimize your team? Enhance cybersecurity awareness. Transparency is one of the key things there. It's amazing how many times you do training, people forget about them. One of the things people do sometimes, for example, is ransomware, the attacks. They do them with DR, they'll do them once a year. We strongly recommend you do those multiple times a year. The more that you can exercise what-if scenarios, the better you're going to be equipped to handle attacks when they happen, especially when you're looking at the peers, not necessarily the people who work for you. The more that you can practice with the HR people, application people, the business units, the more you practice with all these other groups adjacent to security, the better you're going to be in handling security issues when they come up. And don't also forget about collaborating with your external partners. You're going to have cloud, you're going to have Amazon's out there, you're going to have Salesforce.com's out there, and all these other partners. Don't forget to include all of those business partners in your training as well when you're doing
wait,
things.
Jerry, go back for a second because I just want to highlight something.
Yeah.
You pointed out, you skipped over two things, which are paradoxically the things that most folks get started on right away, which 7 is buy stuff and 8 is put in place metrics and reporting. We put them at 7 and 8, not because we don't think they're important, but you'll notice that 1 through 6 is really about getting familiar with the people, processes, what's going on in your organization, building the strategy, and you don't really want to be buying things or establishing metrics until you've done all of that. You can be asking your team to, as an exercise, go through and figure out what technology they think they need and to make, to pitch it to you. But in the meantime, you don't want to say yes on anything they pitch until you've done points 1 through 6. So kind of the big takeaway here is in your first 100 days, buying things comes towards the end, the very end, not at the beginning. And even establishing metrics comes at the end, because figuring out what the right metrics should be really depends on that 1 through 6.
Absolutely. And I would just say on the metrics part is
Yeah.
feedback objectives of champions. Don't keep them to yourself. The more that you can share those metrics with other people, they're aware of what you're measuring. And the more people can understand what you're measuring, the chances are greatly increased for the fact that you're going to get, one, acceptance of what you're doing, and two, the team working together towards improving what those metrics are. Now, over the next life of your CISO, certainly want to continue expanding your strategy and put an architecture roadmap. An architecture is not something that you're going to be doing over the first 90 days, right? 100 days. That's something that's going to evolve over time as your business evolves, as your applications evolve, as the security landscape evolves. That's happening over time. Make sure that you do this wargaming frequently. Once a year is not acceptable. Unfortunately, we see far too often that people lump it in with the DR training, and it's sort of an afterthought. If you want to be good when the real attack happens, you have to be practicing these frequently, and our suggestion is really at least quarterly. And when you do it, don't do it in isolation with security. Do it with DevSecOps, NetSecOps, all of these. You want to group every group that you can, business units as well, HR as well, legal as well. Exercise with all the constituencies. Update and refresh your security awareness training. Don't just do the same thing all the time. Come up with different scenarios. One thing that I see some people do I think is really great is very often you have things like spear phishing attacks with email. I've seen some people that if they inject something and somebody fails and accidentally downloads something, you instantly launch somebody into remedial training. I think that's a great idea on how you can keep social awareness strong, because regardless of all the technology out there, it's usually a human being doing something stupid is usually what your biggest problem is. Find out, keep on top of new technology and threats. There are a bunch of different groups you can get that will tell you what the latest alerts are, give you training. A lot of training you can get for free. You don't always have to pay money for training. And there's different conferences you can go to. The more you can stay abreast with things, find out about a new threat before you're hit, right? Assess things like MITRE ATT&CK. That's great. You can go online. We have I think there's a link here we can send you.
Yeah, it's actually in the report that you can download. But, I was just doing the cybersecurity summit at the Wall Street Technology Association. And one of the big things that bubbled out from this year's cybersecurity summit is MITRE and NIST together are the two frameworks you really want to be betting the town on. That's really where you want to be investing the most. And the great thing is they're both free. You can read up on them, you can come up to speed with them, and use the tools that are developed. So do assess and use those frameworks if at all possible.
And the last thing I'd like to say on this slide is I've become increasingly bearish on cybersecurity insurance, right? It's something that people said, hey, one option is I use insurance to cover you in the event I don't have technology there. What I found over time, though, is as the years roll on, what you need to do to qualify for getting paid for the insurance is going through the roof. And how much you have to pay for the insurance is going through the roof, and what it covers is shrinking. So I'm finding it's something that you need to consider, but look very closely at what your terms and conditions are of cybersecurity, because what I'm finding is it's increasingly becoming more and more expensive for less and less coverage. So beware, look at it, but understand what the limitations are. Okay, we talked about how to get there, how to grow. At some point, you end, right? So what are the things you need to think about? Think about succession planning from the beginning. Identify potential replacements in your company. Evaluate their skills and competencies. Create a development plan for them. What do they need? Because they may have things that you have that you don't have, and vice versa. So create a concrete development plan for these people that are going to replace you when you leave. Give them opportunities for growth. Allow them to step up and take charge of things, because ideally, you want to be at the point where you can feel like you can leave the place in good stead with that replacement that you did. Monitor their progress and don't make it their problem once you leave. It's something that it's really important to grow for a smooth transition.
And let me just weigh in, actually stay on that slide if you would, Jerry. Go
Sure.
back. Yeah. just to weigh in, you may be hearing this and saying, well, I don't get to pick who becomes CISO after me. What if the organization wants an outsider? And the answer can be yes, that is actually their call. But you want to make sure that you leave them with an obvious successor in case, so that the option is theirs, as opposed to forcing them one way or the other, because you're forcing them to bring somebody in because you haven't brought anyone up, for example. So just make that clear. And then a lot of folks ask us where they should go with their, post CISO career. Obviously, you can become a cybersecurity consultant or a professor. You can become a board member or perhaps a member of a number of boards. That can be very lucrative for the right boards. It's also worth considering being the CISO of a not-for-profit, because they probably can't afford you. Even if you get paid, you're still contributing. So you're doing something, doing right by doing good. You also can consider becoming a paid author or speaker. Vendors will hire you in a heartbeat. That's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's great to have people act like you're, the best thing that ever happened to them, because vendors love to get former CISOs on board. The flip side is you then become focused slowly but surely on how to sell this product, which is a little bit more narrow than how to solve a problem. And it may or may not be for everyone. Some people may find it wonderful and exciting because you get to meet with all the different customers. Some people may find the focus too narrow. And of course, you can always work for venture capital, which is, well, Jerry and I can talk to you about that over a beer or a whiskey, right, Jerry?
Absolutely. And so the point is, the world really is yours. So when your career's over, there's sure all plenty of other things you can do. So just to let you know, we appreciate you listening to us. I know this has been a little bit of a taking a drink from the fire hose, a lot of information here, but you'll be able to get a copy of this that you can get online. Yep. Our future things that are coming up is overcoming security compliance and challenges. We're saying April 14th. It's not. I think it's June 14th. I think.
Yes, I think that is actually a mistake, because April 14th is kind of in the past. Yes.
Yes.
And we also have, speaking of in the past, we have organizing the chaos with a workload placement policy, and what is quantum computing good for. You can find those both on our channel. And as Jerry said, check out the attachment link. You can connect with Jerry on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can join the Nemertes community, as you can see here. And as we mentioned, there's the Nemertes issue paper. So you want to be a CISO as one of the attachments. And of course, you can do the June 14th Overcoming Security and Compliance Challenges for Finance, which is coming up in a couple of weeks.
All right. So with that, we really appreciate your time and attention. We hope that gave you some things to chew on, and we hope to see you again in future sessions.
All right. Take care, all.
Bye-bye.